As the US government shutdown stretches into its fourth week, tensions in Washington have reached a breaking point. President Donald Trump has made a bold call, urging Senate Republicans to end the gridlock by taking what he calls the nuclear option, eliminating the Senate filibuster. The move, if taken seriously, would upend a rule that has shaped American democracy for more than 2 centuries. But what exactly is the filibuster? Why is it so controversial? And how realistic is Trump's demand when even his own party seems hesitant? In a post shared on his Truth Social account, President Trump declared that it was time for Republicans to play their Trump card and bring an end to the filibuster, which he argued was preventing the government from reopening. His frustration followed weeks of stalemate in Congress, where Democrats and Republicans failed to reach an agreement to end the shutdown. Sources close to the administration said that during his recent Asia trip, Trump was repeatedly questioned by world leaders about how a government as powerful as the United States could be brought to a standstill. Upon his return, he reportedly reflected on the issue and concluded that the filibuster was a key obstacle preventing decisive action. In his view, removing it would allow the majority to move forward with essential funding bills and end what he described as unnecessary obstruction. The filibuster is one of the most distinctive and, at times, frustrating features of the US Senate. It allows any senator, even a single member, to delay or block a vote on a bill simply by extending debate. To end debate on most matters, the Senate requires 60 votes, a supermajority, rather than the simple majority of 51 needed to pass legislation. This means that unless one party holds at least 60 seats, the minority can effectively block major bills through the filibuster. The term filibuster actually comes from a Dutch word meaning pirate, reflecting the idea of hijacking the legislative process. Traditionally, senators would physically hold the floor and speak for hours, sometimes even days, to prevent a vote. This is known as the talking filibuster. The first recorded instance dates all the way back to 1789, during the very first session of the US Senate. Pennsylvania Senator William McClay noted that some of his colleagues from Virginia deliberately spoke at length to run out the clock and block a bill's passage. Over the centuries, the filibuster has evolved into both a symbol of resistance and a weapon of obstruction. It entered American pop culture in the 1939 film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where actor Jimmy Stewart famously played a young senator standing alone for 24 hours to defend his principles. That scene came to represent the romantic ideal of one person standing up against corruption or tyranny. But in reality, the filibuster's history has not always been so noble. It has been used to block landmark civil rights legislation and stall crucial reforms. One of the most notorious examples occurred in 1957, when South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond spoke for over 24 hours to oppose a civil rights bill, the longest individual filibuster in US history. In more recent years, senators have continued to use marathon speeches as political theater. In April 2025, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker spoke for over 25 hours to protest Trump administration policies, breaking modern records and reviving public debate about whether the practice still serves a democratic purpose. While those long speeches made for memorable television, they're now rare. Since the 1970s, a quieter but far more common tactic known as the silent filibuster has dominated Senate proceedings. Under this system, a senator no longer needs to hold the floor or even speak. All they have to do is signal their intent to object. If at least 40 senators back that objection, the majority leader typically won't schedule a vote, knowing it will fail to reach the 60-vote threshold. As a result, nearly every major bill in modern times requires 60 votes to pass, even though the Constitution only requires a simple majority. Critics say this has turned the Senate into a graveyard for legislation and allowed a minority of senators to routinely block the will of the majority. Proponents, however, argue that the filibuster protects minority rights in Congress and prevents drastic shifts in national policy whenever power changes hands. This latest standoff began when negotiations over federal spending collapsed, forcing a government shutdown that has now lasted over a month. Hundreds of thousands of federal workers remain unpaid, services have been disrupted nationwide, and public frustration has been mounting. President Trump has grown increasingly vocal about what he sees as democratic obstruction in the Senate, claiming that the minority is holding the country hostage through procedural delays. However, despite his insistence, the biggest obstacle to eliminating the filibuster may not be Democrats, but Republicans themselves. Senate Majority Leader John Thune has pledged to preserve the filibuster, viewing it as a cornerstone of Senate tradition. Earlier this year, when Republicans gained control of the upper chamber, Thune reiterated his belief that the 60-vote rule was an essential safeguard against rash decision-making. He has also dismissed the idea of invoking the nuclear option, a procedural move that would allow the Senate to change its rules by a simple majority vote. Meanwhile, House Speaker Mike Johnson told reporters that the president's online post reflected frustration rather than a concrete policy move. He emphasized that the filibuster was not within the House's control and described it as a critical safeguard that prevents one party from imposing sweeping changes when it holds power. Republican leaders fear that if the rule were eliminated, Democrats could one day use their majority to expand the Supreme Court, grant statehood to territories like Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., or pass sweeping gun control measures, policies deeply opposed by conservatives. The filibuster has been modified before. In 2013, Senate Democrats under Harry Reid used the nuclear option to eliminate the 60-vote rule for most presidential appointments. In 2017, Republicans under Mitch McConnell extended that change to Supreme Court nominations. Those changes were initially seen as limited, but each time the rule has been weakened, the Senate has inched closer to eliminating it. Today, with partisanship at historic levels, the filibuster has become a symbol of dysfunction. According to the Congressional Research Service, the number of filibusters has tripled since the early 2000s. Critics argue that the Senate now requires 60 votes for nearly everything, effectively paralyzing the legislative process. Even so, many lawmakers from both parties remain hesitant to remove it entirely, fearing that doing so would permanently alter the balance of power in American governance. For now, Trump's call to end the filibuster appears more like a pressure tactic than an imminent change. Senate leadership has shown no signs of acting on his demand, and procedural changes of that magnitude would require near-unanimous support within the majority, something that does not currently exist. Still, his statement has reignited debate about whether the Senate's rules reflect democratic values or hinder them. If the government shutdown continues, pressure on lawmakers to act will only grow. But ending the filibuster would represent one of the most consequential shifts in American political history, potentially transforming how laws are passed, how presidents govern, and how future majorities wield power. For now, the fate of the shutdown and the future of the filibuster remain uncertain. But one thing is clear: the Senate's oldest rule has once again become its greatest source of conflict. As the standoff continues, Washington faces a familiar question: should the rules that protect minority power in Congress remain sacred, or is it time to remove them in the name of efficiency and progress? History shows that once the nuclear option is used, there's rarely any going back. And if the filibuster truly falls, it could mark the end of one of America's most defining political traditions.